friends. Happy new month. Welcome to the month of April. I'm so glad to have you with me. As you all know, this is Cultivate Your Mental Health. And in this space, we take you from a place of mental illness to a journey of mental wellness, and from mental wellness to mental abundance, because we believe that you were called and designed to live in the overflow. And what does abundance mean? It means getting healthy not just for yourself, but for your community, for others around you. As you also know, my name is Joyce Oze. I am a first generation Nigerian American. I am also a civil rights attorney here in Chicago. I'm also a mental health advocate, not a mental health care professional, but an advocate with lived experience with anxiety and depression specifically. So everything I'm sharing with you are things that I've practiced, that I still practice, and that have really, really brought me on this journey of mental wellness and mental wealth. Okay, we have some goodies today for you. I have goodies. This is actually one of my favorite topics, so I want to give you a brief overview of the show. We are going to be talking about food and your mood. That's right, folks. We're talking about food that affects your mind, your wellness, and your mood because there is a connection. We'll also have audience check ins. I'll tell you what you can expect next. And as always, you can never leave this space without having some practical pushes about how to apply what we've talked about in your everyday life. Now, before we go even further, I want to remind you that we do have an email account. That's right. We always talk about this space being interactive, how this is a conversation between the two of us, not just me talking at you, but a conversation. If you have questions that you would like to ask me or any stories that you want to share anonymously, please email me at comethrive247@gmail.com. That is comethrive247@gmail.com. I've already gotten emails from some folks. Thank you so much. And I will respond to everyone within 3 to 4 business days is my goal, certainly within a week. And who knows, your story, with your permission, can be on the show. The reason why we push for that in this space is that we need to be reminded that we're not alone. We need to be reminded that other people are experiencing the things that we're experiencing. This is your community. This is your space. So I'm going to do an audience check-in a little bit, and I see that y'all are already telling me where you're from. Ohio is really representing deep. Hello, Ohio. Hello from Connecticut. Patricia, thank you so much for joining the space. Continue to drop in the comments where you're tuning in from. I love to hear where y'all are watching in from. This is our virtual community, so let's do that. This is also about food and your mood. So I want to hear what your favorite foods to eat are. What are the foods that you gravitate towards the most? Let's share that today because we are talking all about how that could actually have an impact on our mental health. I bet you didn't know. Okay, so before we get into that, as I've discussed, I like to just set the room before we get into the discussion. Remember, this is your space. This is our conversation. You are free and you are safe in this space to be as transparent and as honest as you want to be. And if there's anything that you want to share one-on-one, you can always email me at comethrive247@gmail.com. And I am also willing to dedicate a whole episode to you if you want to share your story. So, food and your mood. We're getting into some of our favorite foods. I'm going to address it later in the show. I'm going to throw out my favorite food. I don't know if y'all are like this, but I go through seasons of things that I'm really craving that I really like to eat. So Whole Foods has yellow mangoes and I am obsessed with them. I'm not joking. I buy 10 at a time and I give my husband like a couple, but I really eat them all. I've also really, really been craving fried fish sandwiches. Fried fish sandwiches, extra tartar sauce. There's a place in Chicago that gives it with grilled onions. We're going to get into how all of that can practically and scientifically impact our health. So let's get into it. Did you know that there is actually a scientific link between your diet and your emotions? And this actually comes from the relationship between your gut and your brain. How many of you guys knew that your diet could actually affect your mood? So the relationship that I'm talking about, because in this space we do like science, so we're going to get a little bit sciencey, follow me, is the relationship between your brain and what is called your gastrointestinal tract. What is that? Your gastrointestinal tract is really the digestive tract that is made up of organs in your body. And these organs allow food and liquids to travel through your body when they're swallowed, digested, absorbed, and when they leave your body. That is all your GI tract. Some of these organs are your mouth, your pharynx, which is known as your throat, your stomach, your small intestine, your large intestine. We're not going to get into the organs that allow food to leave your body, but y'all know what I'm talking about. Those are all a part of your GI tract, and it is in constant communication with your brain. So let's get into how this works. With your GI tract, there are actually billions of bacteria that influence the chemicals and the substance production. And those bacteria actually carry messages from your gut to your brain. Common example of what these messages are dopamine and serotonin. Have y'all heard about dopamine and serotonin? We hear about dopamine all the time. Sometimes the colloquial use is drugs. But the reason we talk about dopamine in that way is because dopamine is actually the chemical that we produce that helps us feel pleasure. It is a part of the brain's reward system. Serotonin helps you feel satisfaction and happiness and optimism. And it also helps with other bodily functions like sleep. Did you know that there is an estimated 90% of serotonin that is produced in your gut? Yes, the chemical that helps you feel satisfaction, happiness, optimism, all of those positive feelings, 90% of that chemical is produced in your gut. This is why it's so important to understand the relationship between what you eat and how you feel. I see folks dropping comments about what their favorite foods are. Continue to drop the comments because I want us to share our diets and what we like to eat. And we can see if there's a link between that and how we feel. So your gut is actually full of nerve endings. And together, those nerve endings make up what's called the enteric nervous system. That's what's in your gut. And this is connected to your central nervous system, which is controlled by your brain. So if they're connected, the enteric nervous system in your gut and the central nervous system in your brain, they are constantly communicating to each other. And the information that is collected by the nerves in your stomach is communicating directly to your brain. Your stomach is telling your brain how to feel. Isn't that fascinating? So I want to get into food and how food is digested and what that does with that relationship between our gut and our brain. So when we eat foods that are dense and rich in nutrients, we're actually promoting what is called the growth of good bacteria. What does that look like? What does that mean? So good bacteria actually affects the way serotonin, the chemical that makes us feel good and optimistic, and dopamine, the chemical that makes us feel pleasure, in a good way. So when we're eating foods that are healthy and rich in all these nutrients, we're affecting the production of those chemicals among other chemicals. And when we are producing these chemicals optimally or in the best way, our brains receive these messages loud and clear. Our brains actually receive messages from our gut, and our mental state can actually reflect this. And if you don't believe me, this is actually going to be something we'll get into later. I can talk about my relationship with sugar in a little bit, and we'll talk about how that affects things. So, I wouldn't really say that I have a sweet tooth. I mean, I do love a good homemade dessert, and I love ice cream on a dessert, but I never want to go to the store and buy like Chips Ahoy or Oreos. For those of you who may not be in the States, those are both kind of pre-packaged, processed cookies. But I do love cookies that was baked in somebody's kitchen, in somebody's oven, because those taste different to me. They don't have the same chemicals. Um, but even though I don't have a sweet tooth when it comes to dessert, and I can do without eating candy, I really like juice. I love juice. I'm not talking about like Hawaiian punch or like the really high fructose corn syrup juice. I'm talking about apple juice. I know that makes me sound like I'm 10 years old, but the tartness and the sweetness, I love it to the point where I actually had to stop myself from buying it because what would happen is in college, I remember this distinctly. I always had a thing of apple juice in my fridge. And if I was running low on the apple juice, I would get really anxious and I would have to think, oh my gosh, when can I get to the store to get another thing of apple juice because I'm running low and I really need the apple juice. I would also plan my day on when I can get back to my house or something to get some juice. I know it sounds a little bit like an addiction, and I'm here to say that it actually is because sugar has an effect on your mind as well as your gut. And the more you take of it, the more you want it. And I want to talk about sugar and other examples of food that can affect your mood and affect your mind because of how it's affecting your gut. I just wanted to share a little bit about my relationship with sugar, especially when it comes to juice, because I realized in my life that it's a real thing. So, did you know that diets that are high in sugar can actually cause inflammation in your body? And what this happens is that there's an imbalance in your body when you're processing food that is really high in sugar. And this could actually lead to you craving even more sugar than you did before. So, what would happen is I would take a sip of my juice, and then that sugar would sit on my mouth, and I would want even more of that same sweet thing. Sometimes I would actually be hungry, but my brain is telling me that I want sugar. Have you ever given like candy to a child and they're just like, give me more, give me more? Because when you're processing sugar, it does something to your brain. In fact, we talked about how sugar can cause inflammation in your body. Did you know that sugar can also trick your brain into thinking that it's a good thing? It's really tricky because when you're feeding your body sugar, it causes an imbalance that can affect your overall mood. And it actually sends the wrong types of messages to your brain. And what happens is that it could lead to a temporary spike in feeling good, which is dopamine, but it's only temporary. So when you drink it or you eat it, there's a rush of I feel good. It actually is like the same chemical in your brain that feels like you've rewarded yourself. That's what sugar triggers. But we call it temporary because it's just a spike. And what often happens when you have high levels of sugar in your body is you crash. What would happen to me is I am left feeling worse than I did before I took the sugar. This actually results in mood swings, which brings us back to our mood and food and mental health. If you find that you have a diet that's high in sugar and you also tend to get kind of moody throughout the day or irritable, check your diet. You may be causing the wrong balance of the bad bacteria in your gut because of sugar, which spikes up your dopamine, but then causes you to crash. And we don't want that. Wellness is all about balance, and we want to approach everything in a way that is balanced. So, as I was saying with sugar, it can lead to chronic gut inflammation. And that actually can also affect the brain and the nervous tissue. Because remember, the nerves in our stomach are connected with the nerves in our brain. And if our gut is inflamed, it can actually inflame the tissues in our brain and nervous system. And did you know that that kind of inflammation can actually trigger generalized anxiety, which is a mental health disorder? An unhealthy amount of unrefined sugar can actually do that, especially when it's high fructose corn sugar. It just inflames our bodies. And funny enough, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety in college. And it's not to say that I haven't always experienced that as a child. We've talked about my story. You can watch those videos on BDO's YouTube page about my story and my journey, the first two episodes. So I was always kind of prone to anxiety. But I can tell you right now that my diet, especially in college, was not helping my mental health because I was consuming things that actually continue to trigger the anxiety that I was already feeling. So sugar is a major culprit. Another thing I want to say is as we're going through this, none of these foods should be demonized. None of these foods are inherently bad. In fact, you can find sugar in a lot of natural foods like fruit and things like that, things that are good for you. Yogurt has sugar, even organic juice has sugar. I am not a healthcare professional. I am an advocate, but it is to say that even if something isn't bad, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't moderate it. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be mindful of it. Always follow the advice of a healthcare provider. Always. And if they ask you to eliminate it, eliminate it. But for those of you whose health isn't directly or medically affected by this, but it is affecting your mood, which is affecting your health, but a healthcare provider hasn't told you to eliminate it, I encourage you to restrict or modify it. Make sure that you're moderating the amount of unrefined sugars that you're taking in. Splurge on special occasions, but you do not need to have unrefined sugars on a daily basis. Your mental health will thank you for it. I now stick to sparkling water, which has like 2 grams of sugar, and it is so refreshing. It's carbonated, and it's just so much better for my body. And it's water with just a little bit of grapefruit in it or a little bit of lemonade in it. I'm happy to follow up with what I drink specifically at my email at comethrive247@gmail.com. Let's talk more about some other foods that could affect your mood in a bad way. How about foods that are high in trans fat? How many of y'all have heard about foods that are high in trans fat? Did you know that this could be linked to decreased levels of serotonin? Remember, serotonin is a chemical that our bodies produce that help us feel optimistic, happy, and satisfied with life. When you're eating foods that are high in trans fat, it makes you feel the exact opposite because what it does is it also prevents the production of what is called omega-3 fatty acids. And omega-3 fatty acids actually improve brain function and your overall mental health. So, what types of foods are high in trans fat? This is going to be a hard one to talk about. Let's just say a little prayer for ourselves as we speak the truth in boldness and love. Fried foods. Fried foods are high in trans fat. I didn't love this. I'm not going to lie because, like I said, I'm in a season of really liking fried fish sandwiches because they're delicious, but they are high in trans fat. So is pizza. So are doughs. Sticks of margarine are high in trans fat. Processed foods like potato chips, French fries, those are all foods that are high in trans fat. Doesn't mean that we never eat those things. Again, no. Doesn't mean that we regularly eat those things. Again, no. Everything in moderation, especially these types of food, because we need those serotonin levels if we're trying to get to places of mental wellness, because we need our bodies to produce those chemicals so that our brains can be affected for the overall good. So stay away from fried foods, pizzas, doughs, margarine, just anything that's going to affect the way our gut produces serotonin. Another category that we're going to have to be real about: alcohol. Alcohol. I know you may think it's a mood elevator when you're out with your girls, when you're out with the guys, kicking it. You want something that's going to make you feel like a vibe. You got a little alcohol. But did you know that alcohol is actually a depressant? And what that means is it reduces the function of your nervous system, which slows down the messages between your brain and your body. That is a mood affector. So the thing that you're drinking that you think is going to make you feel better is actually chemically making you feel worse because it's throwing off the things of our body that are supposed to produce stable moods, like good levels of dopamine, good levels of serotonin. It slows everything down. And did you know that actually when you drink alcohol, the next day you can actually have increased symptoms of anxiety? This is why it is so important to get in touch with a healthcare provider, a therapist if you're feeling low. A glass of wine, although it's really popular in our culture, drinking wine when you're upset, drinking some whiskey when you're down, it's actually going to make you feel worse than when you started because it wasn't meant to chemically cure what you're experiencing. And it can actually reduce the quality of your sleep. And did you know that when you aren't sleeping well, it affects your mood and it can lead to depression? A lack of sleep and depression are scientifically linked. So, again, moderation, moderation, moderation when it comes to alcohol consumption. And especially not using it to self medicate if you're feeling low or if you're going through something. So, I just gave y'all a bunch of things that you cannot eat. But what about things that you can eat? What is there for you to eat? Well, like I said, we're talking about food and your mood. In fact, this is a conversation that we're going to be having all month long. So tune in 2 weeks for the part 2 of this. But I'm going to give you suggestions on foods that are going to increase and support the production of chemicals that will help affect your mood for the better. We will also talk about some quick recipes that you can implement in your day to day to affect your mood and to get on a journey of mental wellness. And I promise you it's going to taste good. Just because it's healthy for you doesn't mean it has to taste bad. So we'll get into that in 2 weeks. But I want to give you an overview of foods that can taste good, just so you're not mad at me for taking away all the bad foods that you like or the foods that aren't as good that you like. So, whole foods. Have y'all heard about whole foods? Those are just foods that don't have preservatives, food colorings, and other chemical additives. I'm not saying that all processed food is bad. When you take fresh tomatoes and you put them in the blender, that's technically processing food because they're changing it from one state to another state. So when you see processed food, it's not inherently bad. But when you see additives like chemicals and food coloring, that could affect your mood. So we want to make sure that the processed foods that we're eating, if we have to eat them, are minimally processed. If it's like I've gotten some oranges and I've squeezed them and it's fresh pressed, that's processed, but it's minimally processed because maybe they didn't add additional sugars to it. Maybe they didn't add preservatives to it. Fresh fruit and vegetables in a variety of colors are best when it comes to whole foods. And we'll talk about this a little bit in 2 weeks, but did you also know that when you're looking at your plate of food, you want it to be colorful? Because a lot of the times with fruits and vegetables, the color of the food will actually tell you what types of nutrients are inside of it. So if your food looks like one color, like all beige or all brown, that's not a good sign. You're probably not getting the diversity of nutrients that you need. So that's whole foods. Also, fiber. Plant-based foods are often full of fiber and they help our bodies absorb all the sugars that we sometimes like to eat and that come from food. And what it does is fibers help us absorb those sugars more slowly, which helps you not spike in your sugar high and crash in a sugar low. We want to be able to absorb the sugars that we're eating in a way that's balanced and stable for our moods. Foods that are rich in fiber are fruits, veggies, whole grains, and beans. I just made some breakfast burritos with black beans, eggs, green onions, some salsa. It was fantastic. Again, these foods can taste good, high in protein and fiber, and it helps our mood stabilize. The last category that we'll talk about for today are antioxidants. Did you know that antioxidants, I've heard it all the time. What you can remember these chemicals as being inflammation fighters. What they do is they fight the inflammation that our guts produce based on what we've been eating or stress or anything like that. Remember, chronic inflammation can actually trigger mental health issues like generalized anxiety or mood disorders like depression. So we actually need antioxidants to fight that inflammation because we want our brains to be functioning stably and optimally in the best way possible. It affects our mood. Berries are high in antioxidants, leafy green vegetables, there's a spice called turmeric that's high in antioxidants, salmon, and dark chocolate. You see, you don't have to cut out everything. These are simply an overview of the foods that you can feed your gut to support stable mood and your overall mental wellness. But now, my favorite part is seeing some of the things that y'all have been talking about. Sharon, so good to see you. Tina, I love having some Ohio ladies in the house. Shola from Michigan, another Midwest gal. Thank you so much for being with us. And I see, yeah, so many delicious things. Sharon, you love avocados and fish. Oh my gosh, God bless you. Avocados are high in omega-3 fatty acids, and that does a lot for just our overall brain health. And also, avocados, I was reading, has zero trans fat. So they do have the fatty acids that our body needs, but it's not the trans fat that's going to affect our dopamine production and the ways that makes our brain feel good. But I see that your weakness is chocolate ice cream and potato chips. I also really like chocolate ice cream. And again, you don't have to cut those out unless a healthcare provider says so. You can enjoy them just in moderation, maybe like once a week, maybe on your birthday. But I believe in balance. I don't believe in elimination unless advised by a healthcare professional. Lamar, apples and peanut butter. I literally packed that for lunch today. The great things about apples and peanut butter is that it's sweet, but you also get the saltiness. And there's a lot of protein in peanut butter, so it makes you feel full. But with apples, you get that freshness and you get kind of like a balanced snack. The skin of apples is also really good. So do not peel your apples, just wash them really well because the skin gives you a lot of fibers. And the skin of apples are really dense and rich with nutrients. One of my favorites. Pecan pie and fried catfish. You sound like my mom. I love those. And oh my goodness, cranberry juice with ginger ale. That sounds so nice. Twizzlers. I've never gotten into Twizzlers actually. So I'm going to avoid that because I don't need one more thing to add to my list of addictions. And Patrick, it's so nice to have you. One love for sure, family and a safe space. And Ramona from Dallas, hey, I bet you it's super hot over there. Thank you so much for joining the space. I love seeing you. Yes, Tina, I love mangoes so much. What a smart idea to use the skin as tea. Keep the comments coming. Email me, and I'm so happy to connect with you in that way. But as we talked about, tune in 2 weeks for part 2 of the foods that affect your mood. And also next week, we have our mental health summit, April 18th. Tune in. I'll be hosting one of the panels, and we have so many goodies for you. But before we leave, one of my favorite parts of the show are the practical pushes that you can use and take away towards wellness. Stay tuned. Again, I do not support diet culture that tells you you should feel bad or shamed for eating certain things. I don't think that any long-term change can come from negative emotions. Don't do anything out of guilt. Don't do anything out of shame. You're not being naughty for eating ice cream. You're not being bad for eating chocolate. Instead, tell yourself, I want to give my mental health the best chance to thrive and survive. And I want to support my body because I'm worth it. So, as we're talking about this, I want us to use that framework instead. And we'll talk at a later date about diet culture and how it negatively can affect our mental health. This isn't diet culture, this is lifestyle and sustainability and mental wellness. Two things I want to talk about as practical pushes. First, I want you to check in with yourself after you eat something. 30 minutes to an hour, stop and ask yourself, how are you feeling? Not shame or guilt, but do you feel like your mood has lessened? Do you feel more groggy? After those fried fish sandwiches, I'm gonna tell you right now, I feel sleepy. It makes me feel lethargic. I don't feel as active and motivated. So I want you to honestly check in with yourself after you eat something and document either mentally or physically writing something about how that made you feel. The reason we do this is so that we can see what foods are optimal for making us feel good and what foods do we like that can boost that. I don't really like refried beans, but I love black beans. So I incorporate that into my diet as a replacement. So check in with yourself. Number two, I want you to introduce one new fruit or vegetable into your grocery basket or your weekly repertoire. Just something new. Remember, the more colorful your plate is, the more nutrient dense and nutrient rich it is, because fruits and vegetables carry the nutrients inherently, and it's often reflected through color. So add something new to your list, something you haven't tried. Try a yellow mango instead of a red mango. Try a different type of orange. There are so many varieties of apples. Go for it. Food and your gut and your mental health should be fun, and you deserve to explore new things and try new things because you deserve mental wellness. That is all I have for you folks. I cannot wait to see you in 2 weeks, April 25th. I also hope that you'll join us April 18th for the Mental Health Summit. And as always, come thrive 247 at gmail.com if you want to chat, share your story, or ask questions from a mental health advocate. Until then, go thrive.